Decoding Learning Differences with Kimberlyn Lavelle, and this episode is Leading Change with Caroline Digman. As you'll see, she is someone on the inside still teaching in the public schools in California and making a difference, and I was excited to chat with her and see what she's doing and get some inspiration. Enjoy. Hello, Caroline, and welcome to the podcast. I was excited to hear you sharing that you were pushing things in your union and you're training people, and there's a lot going on. And I just thought you had some interesting stories to share. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to share as well as to ask you more questions about all of it. So can you introduce yourself to everyone and share a little bit about what all you're doing?
So I am in my 9th year of teaching, all second grade, a splash of third. I would say a splash of third because my first year was half second, half third, and then I've done a 2-3 combo. So, but majority second grade. Um, and this is a second career for me. I thought I was going to be an election law attorney. I was halfway through law school. I quit. My dad was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer. I realized I did not want to die an attorney. So, it was like a lot of people during COVID had wake up calls. My wake up call happened in 2010. But irrevocably, it changed how I think. It changed my entire thinking process. And it's really affected how I approach teaching. Along the way, I had a child. And I'm really cognizant of his agency. He's still a minor, so there's some things I don't talk about in public, but I'm pretty open with my colleagues. But I had a really difficult class my third year, really, really difficult because of special needs issues. And I decided that I needed to know more about the system to better advocate not only for myself, but for my students. And then about a year later, my son was diagnosed with autism. So I immediately went from, okay, I need to know more about these issues as a teacher so I can better teach my students. And then I immediately took the perspective of a parent who's sitting on the other side of that table during IEP meetings. So I just started learning about autism, which I knew a little bit, but I thought I knew about autism. I thought I did, but I didn't really know a lot about it. And then I started learning about speech and what speech therapists do, SLPs, and then started learning about ADHD and incorporating that into my classroom. And it's been about a 5-year process. And now I teach a class for my union on how to build an inclusive classroom. And so it'll be a 6-hour class this spring. And then I realized I need to get accredited so people believe what I'm saying. So I'm going to get nationally board certified in exceptional needs this spring. So I passed component 1. I just need to pass the other 3 components. So just to get that little pin on my lapel so people believe what I'm doing and saying. But that's kind of it in a nutshell. And reading, that's the Mount Everest. That's the Mount Everest of inclusion, of building inclusive systems, because it is the largest group of children under IDEA. And that's just, I'm hoping it's not going to take 10 years, but we'll see. So that's basically it.
So yeah, and you sent me the slides for the inclusivity training. So I kind of looked through that, and which it makes so much sense, the law background being tied into who you are and everything. And yeah, that had a lot of great stuff in it of things to keep in mind and to learn from going forward. What are some of the maybe 3 or whatever biggest things, the most important things that you try to make sure all of the teachers learn and walk away from the training with?
The biggest thing I say is get out of your comfort zone, take on the perspective of a child with a disability, be comfortable knowing that there's going to be things that you might not want to do, because it's not in your best interest, but it's in the best interest of the child. And what I mean by that, not to be like Joan of Arc or anything, we're not looking for, savior complexes, but like, for instance, my supplies, uh, crayons, manipulatives, I like it when it's out in the open. I put them away because my kids who are neurodivergent need that accommodation to have it be out of sight, out of mind, because it's too tempting. And so there are things all throughout my classroom that I do for the child with one of the disabilities. I even had a student a number of years ago with visual impairments. And I was like, yes, because I got to talk to the specialist who consulted with the district. And I was like, please tell me, what are the top things? And she mentioned, black and white and having things close and far away. And so these are my vocabulary cards. And so I say in the training to the teachers, I made videos at the end, everything in the classroom is intentional. There's nothing accidental. There's nothing accidental. It's all based in UDL, inclusivity principles. Even the desks are facing the wall, which sounds counterintuitive, but it's incredibly helpful for kids with attention issues or sensory issues. So yeah, that's what I want to take away. Just think differently. Just be like Steve Jobs, think different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, so have you had this experience? Because I know it happens all the time where there's teachers who are resistant to those changes. Like, I don't want to, this is how I do things. That's not what I do. Then they give it a try.
Yeah.
Like, for whatever it is, gets through to them and they're like, okay, I'm going to try it. Or fine, I'll try it. But, whatever it is, either they believe it or they don't believe it, they try it. And then they start to realize that it didn't help just that one kid. Because that's a lot of times their argument.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to do all this just for one kid.
I know.
Just try it. It helps the one kid. But, oh, it actually helped those 7 other kids too, that they didn't realize, they never knew that it would help anyone else. Like, they thought it was just for the one kid. Have you
Yeah.
had that?
Oh yeah. I mean, I say, like, I have 3 tattoos. I have one of how many people are registered to vote. I have one that was like a word my dad used to say love all the time. I have that one. And then I have another tattoo that, wild night out on the town tattoo. The 4th tattoo I would get would say curb cut, because that is entirely what I do in the classroom. That when you design for one child, it ends up accidentally, whether you realize it or not, being beneficial for multiple children. So I have, but the thing, I don't think I've had teachers that will actively resist. They haven't said, no, I won't do that. I've actually seen the opposite. I've seen teachers that are overwhelmed by having to make quick changes for accommodations. And I tell them, if you did this globally, it takes time, but then you wouldn't be reacting when you get a child 1 year that needs a higher level of accommodations or modifications. And I've also had teachers, a lot of teachers, they think they're being inclusive I say for neurodiverse learners, because that's predominantly what I focus on. They think they're being inclusive. And then it's like, no, there's more you could do. There's more you could do. And I always say the example of PBIS. That's the 1997 idea of reauthorization. There's stuff that you do, you don't even know you're doing it, that it was designed for kids with disabilities. So I've never had teachers actively resist. More of a, I'm doing okay. I'm like, no, we could do more.
Yeah.
Which no one really wants to hear. No one wants to hear that. Some teacher going, you could do more, The teachers do a lot, but.
Yeah. But once they realize that if they do more, it's easier for everyone, then once they truly accept that, there is a lot more buy-in. I have had teachers literally tell me, like,
Yeah.
showing them an IEP. Okay, this is what's on the IEP. Oh, no, I don't do that. No, this document says you do that.
A legal document. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's because I have a child that they don't want to like say it to my face. I don't know. But yeah, no, the legal document, I'm like, guys, and I've said to teachers, I'm like, the reason this is so lengthy is because of parents like me, because there was somewhere someone was refusing to do things. And so all these pages and pages and pages, um, no one wants that. But at a certain point, it's legal protections, it's, acknowledgement of rights. And um, we wouldn't be here, in my opinion, if we all were, as a society, I think, willing to uh, be more inclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And recognizing when we're not being, like you said, people think they're being inclusive and they're doing something, like they're
Yeah.
trying. They just don't know what they don't know. They haven't thought about that the playground is not accessible for the kids in wheelchairs because it just has never crossed their mind.
Right.
So until you're confronted with that child and looking at that playground, you're like, okay, we could do better. So
Yeah. And it happens to me too. It's I think there's probably a term for it. It's it has to do with perspective and stuff. You just get in your lane. But I was talking about it with a teacher the other day, because about reading, saying, and they said, it takes time. And I said, well, here's the thing. I hear that. I know that objectively making these changes takes time. What I would appreciate is the fact that a lot of parents of kids with exceptional needs don't have that luxury of being okay with the situation, because we have to act to do interventions. And so I kind of had to do that simultaneously, and I got really good at making changes, making adjustments to my life, as I experienced the process of, the existential thought, what does this mean, and so they were like, well, I hadn't thought about that. And I said, yeah, that's why a lot of parents get frustrated, because it's like, I don't live in that world, I live in this world.
yeah,
So it's been interesting.
yeah, yeah. And it's good to have that perspective of like those two worlds and how they kind of need to overlap, but sometimes there's just a big gap between being able to really understand the other perspective.
Yeah.
So having someone in your position who's like, yeah, no, I'm seeing both sides. I need you to understand this part,
Yeah.
because I definitely see that both ways. It's like parents not understanding something about the school and what its
Yeah.
limitations are and how like it can't give you what you're asking for, or you're not giving the school enough credit. They're trying really hard. They're
Right.
doing everything they can. But something like, or the school not understanding that the parent is working super hard and their child is still struggling, and that needs to be part of the evaluation and whether or not the child is qualifying or something. Like there's a lot there.
Yeah. I mean, I've told parents, I said, look, educating 27 second graders in a room this size is probably the worst idea we've ever had in the history of the universe. Like, it is I said, when I was in college, I would go into a room or the library, and if I saw 26 other people in close proximity, I would walk the other way. There was no way I would sit down. And so and on the perspective of like realistic things, um, I see both sides, thinking, I know you want to check in, check out, uh, but I've got 26 other kids and it is astronomically difficult. I met a teacher a number of years ago. She was like feeling bad that she couldn't like make these changes. She was like a long-term sub for someone who needed it. And I was like, look, I was like, the ABA folks, they do 2-hour shifts and then they get a break, and they're changing behaviors. They're fundamentally changing behaviors. I said, you've got 26 other kids. You're not going to fundamentally change behaviors. Let's just stop kidding ourselves. You're not going to fundamentally change this child's behavior when you've got 26 other kids in the room. And so the ratio, I mean, but that's an even bigger conversation. Yeah, it should be 15-1, right? It should.
Yeah.
But until taxpayers demand that.
Yeah.
But there are things we can do. There are things
Yes. Yes. There are things we can do. So what are some things we can do? There's more that you've been doing too, so
the reading is the number one. And again, I think this is the perspective of like, I don't know, I think in like triage, like, okay, let's do the biggest things first, right? Reading.
yes.
That's a monster
Yes.
because you've got kids in self-contained special education classes who their primary qualifying disability isn't SLD, but statistically they're also likely to have dyslexia, processing issues. The point I made in the memo I wrote for my union is we're never going to be fully inclusive until we address the reading, because it's the largest group of kids under IDEA. We can't mix kids. How is someone from a self-contained classroom supposed to come get their mainstreaming minutes, and then in this other classroom we're teaching under whole language principles? It's a waste of time, and it's, in my opinion, and it's really, those are like fire words. My mom calls them fire words. But I don't, to me, it's not an emotional thing to make this switch. It's logic. It's the data. This is obviously what we should be doing. I was explaining to someone the other day and I said, you got a lot of teachers that were doing it the other way for 20 years. They were told by very educated people that this is the way to teach reading. And they didn't realize that. I said, it's a referendum on their career. It is personal. I was only 3 years in before I made the change. But I know a teacher, she's 30 years in and she made a change. And I give her all the credit in the world because I'm like, that's brave. That is brave to look back and say, I should have done these things differently. So I'm just happy. I'm happy that structured literacy, that screening for reading difficulties finally got passed in California. And the memo I wrote for my union is saying, this is going to change a lot of things and we need to be ready for it. Change for the better. So the reading, it's just, if you don't have reading, it's just, what are we doing? Yeah. Does that answer the question? I don't know. I go off on tangents so much, but.
You did somewhat, but I'm not sure that our listeners are going to be clear on what the memo is.
Oh, okay.
So I feel like we talked about it, but not really addressed exactly what it is and what your goal was in writing it. And who?
So back in October, I work in a very large district, probably ninth largest. So we're large district, tens of thousands of students. I asked some folks, I said, what are you doing to prepare teachers? This is coming. It's coming 2025. I wasn't active in passing the bill. I had a small child, but I was watching from the news. Like, come on. They said, well, we're waiting on the state. And I was like, ooh, because, the state gives guidance about 10 days before school starts. So then I went to, and right. And then I went to the union and I said, do you know this passed? And to their credit, they were like sophisticated enough to go to like, you could see like the lights going off, like, boop, 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 like this is going to affect everything. And they went, no, which I was like, I mean, I said, you can't be omnipotent. You can't know everything in all things. Right. Yeah. But this is a big one, So, then I was like, oh no. And then, this TikTok saying, oh no. And then I asked some teachers, I said, do you know that dyslexia or screening for reading difficulties is happening? And I got some eye rolls because, it's another state mandate, because they didn't know. They don't know everything. And so I was like, I got to write a memo. I've got a bachelor's degree in history. So that's kind of also my perspective. And I knew it was like, people are going to be making decisions that have never taught elementary school. They don't know about the reading wars. They have no clue. So I need these people to be quickly educated on what the parameters are and what we're talking about. And so, yeah, they said, 25 pages, because it just kept being, it was like 12 pages and 13 pages and then 15 pages. And I was like, oh my gosh. Um, because it's kind of a blueprint for a district-wide training. Minimum 1 day K2 teachers, at minimum, and the EL department, because that's going to be a huge issue. So they're reading it. They have like a team reading it. I'm like, oh, sorry. I didn't mean to make it so long, but it needed to cover almost everything. So they're reading it, and I think we're just going to go from there. But I think the state is going to release their list of screening instruments this December. I think by December, right? So people are like, oh, it's 2025. And I'm like, yeah, but it's bureaucracy. It takes that long to like read the memo and then convene the committee. And I said, I don't want to be on the working group, because I just get too angry. I get too angry as a parent. But this is my role. My job is to brief you on what the issues are and then go do it. So, and I think there wasn't an urgency, and I think the lack of urgency, I'm biased. I think if you have a child who has struggled with reading, it's personal. So, yeah. So I think it'll happen.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, it's like 2025 to a school sounds really fast, because we've got to make all these changes. We've got to have this in place. We've got to figure this out in 2025. But to a parent who currently has a struggling second grader, they're like, I can't wait, like now. So yeah, I always feel that is like, no, we can't wait. And people need time to figure things out and make decisions. So we also don't want them rushing into the wrong thing, but the data's all there. So they could quickly make a good decision if they talk to the people who have the answers and be like, okay, what should we do? Okay, let's do that.
And I think that's where I've had conversation, like you said, if you know the data and all the history, of course it's logical. Of course, like why wouldn't you? And I've like angered some people because I said, I want to have this conversation with you about reading, but I feel like I'm talking about antibiotics and you're talking about leeches.
I love
Like,
that.
how do I even? We're talking two different languages. Um, I don't even know where to begin, you know? Um, and yeah, that's why usually I'm like, I'm better at writing memos than I am committee. Yeah. I don't know where to begin.
Yeah, I feel
Because in
that.
other schools, it's been very quick. They got trained, they got letters trained, they are making changes. And the other
Yeah.
schools, it's just very difficult. So,
Yeah, and that's all it really takes is, I shouldn't say all it really takes,
no.
but when you've got willing teachers
Mhm.
or even excited teachers and administration that is willing and or excited, they're like, okay, let's do it, and we're doing it. And it can be so fast so fast in that kind of a role, like making a big change pretty quickly. Within a couple of months, you can have change made and everyone's shifting their perspective. But middle of the school year, not likely for most things to change, although they could start getting trained now
Yeah.
and
Well, and a
start
lot of
next year with
Well, and
strength.
hundreds of teachers have been trained to our credit. I've talked to some teachers where they have at some districts where there's like nothing going on. There's no training. So to our credit, I mean, I got hundreds of hours of professional development that in our contract we're required to get every 5 years. So it was very incentivized. It was carrot, not stick. Other states have done the stick. I don't think that's necessarily the best way, because you've got high school teachers learning about digraphs.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but at a certain point, the carrots aren't working for a certain percentage of teachers that have a very big impact on reading. So what's the next step for this? So oh, I was going to say something else, but I lost my train of thought. But Oh, quick decisions. I asked someone, I said, well, because we were workshop school. We were like all into Lucy Calkins and everything. I said, how did that happen? They said strong leadership. There was a principal that came in and just she believed in it full force. And then their next principal or a couple principals after that was a reading recovery person, huge reading recovery person. I mean, one of the early adopters of it. Um, and she got a huge library of leveled books that are collecting dust that no one uses. But it was strong leadership. And so I was like, well, we need strong leadership, but I think a lot of teachers are burned by ironically the quick changes, by this swoop of balanced literacy that came in. And like my colleague who taught for 30 years, being told, oh, it's research based, it's research based, it's research based. Everyone says it's research based, right? So I know there's a fear of like, we're going to we'll start doing all this structured literacy stuff. And people will go the other way, and all of a sudden everyone's doing skill and drill, so but that's human nature, right? So
Yeah.
I like reading Shanahan's blog, because it's like my weekly, like, what do you do, I call it what are you doing wrong, like, blog post. Like nonsense words, the phonological. There was a post about RIP, advanced phonological awareness, like, ooh, there's not a lot of research on doing these elaborate drills on
Yeah.
switching phonemes and dropping phonemes and
Yeah.
putting a phoneme in, and
Yeah.
so but you gotta be brave. Yeah, I mean, not that brave, but yeah, the blog post, because I'll be doing something and be really excited about it, and then I read a blog post and I'm like, oh, from Timothy, I'm like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, oh well, that was great, great little experiment.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's what you need, right? Is like to keep to stay fresh and to say, okay, because we also don't know until the research has come out. And
Right,
when we're looking at those meta-analyses of this research plus this research plus this research, and okay, now we know that that's probably not the best use of your time.
right.
But it wasn't really harming the kids along the way. We can just adjust
No,
now.
right,
So whereas
right.
there are some other things that were happening that were kind of harming the kids along the way, but also no one was doing it with the intention of harming kids.
No,
So I do
no,
get mad at the companies who were not really caring whether or not it worked. They just wanted to sell a product and they're very into like making money.
right.
That I'm frustrated about.
Yeah,
But the teachers were just always trying to do their best and they
right.
believed in it and they found ways to make to for success to happen in
Hmm.
some way for some kids.
Hmm.
For most kids, they found at least some reading success, but yeah, anyway.
Yeah, we heard a
Um,
presentation from a curriculum company, and it was like very cute, so cute. We loved it. And then we peeled back the layers and we heard the presentation and we were like, you just repackaged this. At one point it was like they called them memory words. And it was tough. It was like all the teachers in this committee are like serious, structured literacy folks. And they said, well, it wasn't really confirmed until recently about, like, was it essentially orthographic mapping? And we were like, nope, but if you just looked at the curriculum, you'd be like, and if someone came, who had a doctorate and said, this is the way to go. Yeah, there's a lot of trust involved, but
yeah.
yeah. So we were like, no, we were like, there's not even a way. We're not even gonna let this, no. It's cute, but
But that's so great that you have that committee who is all structured literacy up to date. They understand the research and they are like, yeah, no.
yeah,
Like it's also frustrating that those curriculums still exist, that they're still like, I can't think of the term, but like blessed by the state of California, approved. They're like approved as like
Yeah.
official curriculum. Like, no, like stop approving the bad stuff.
Well, and that was the other thing I asked. That was part of why I wrote the memo, is because so in our district we still have 3 years left on a contract with a curriculum that they have updated it to be more in alignment. Um and it's not really in alignment. We looked at it, and there's pacing issues. I mean, it wasn't bad. I actually advocated. I was like, don't throw the baby out with your bath water or whatever. Don't cut your nose to spite your face, or one of those colloquialisms. I was like, oh, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. The decodables were better than the last stuff they had. But one of the reasons I wrote the memo was it was like, because we're not going to have that master list from the state on a curriculum for what, 4 years, I think, until they update the ELA framework. So we're allowed to buy new curriculum at school sites, but we've got to use school site money to do that. And it's just, screening is happening before everything else has come into alignment. And I think Newsom had the literacy plan, which is not the ELA framework, that came out a couple years ago, the state literacy plan or something. It's more explicit, saying
Yeah.
we need structured literacy. But yeah, so the timing's all off. So but then we have UFly, right? It's basically free. It's all open source, and so I think that's what's different. I think a lot of teachers on the committee are realizing, you know it's the internet. Not that I don't want to like teachers pay teachers it out or anything, because I trust in stuff that's been tested and
Yeah.
everything. But like when we did structured literacy, I think when we tried to 20 something years ago, we didn't have YouTube. And now we have like all these phonics songs, and like that Cara Cervano, do you know her? She does wonderful songs. Yeah, just Kara. She works for OG, for Orton Gillingham.
Okay. I'll have to look it up.
Anyways, but yeah, so you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars on curriculum,
Right.
because UFly's there, Dibbles is there. It's all university backed. So
Yeah. There's Nate Hansford, and he has a team of people who recently, just teachers, on their own time, on their own money, created a completely free science of reading curriculum, because he's all into all the science of reading and like all the analyses and all the things. I had him on the podcast recently.
yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, so and it's all great and free. Unfortunately, it's not, blessed by the state as an official curriculum, which is kind of frustrating, because it's like, we know it's good,
Yeah,
probably, like he admits, well, it's not, we haven't done any testing yet, but anyways, but yeah, like you're saying, like there are free options that are really good,
yeah.
and yet and there was another one that he had posted about a long time ago that has existed for like 20 years and is great,
Mhm.
that some teacher put out as free on the internet, completely free, and it was like, they exist, and yet the curriculum companies need to make money, so
Right.
they send their representatives and convince you that you got to spend $100,000 on this brand new
Right.
curriculum. And so yeah, it's
Even the length of contracts, a 7-year contract for a curriculum. I'm like, I tell people, I'm like, I wasn't the best at law school. During exams, everyone would be like stressed out, and I would hear Mimi Ripperton, la 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 la. That was my first clue. I was like, this is not for me. But one thing I tell people I did do, I got to be in contracts. I got to be in contracts. I did pretty okay in that class. I didn't like property or anything else. It was horrible, criminal contracts. So the fact that a 7-year contract, like, I think society definitely, it's like post-COVID, we've changed. And I think if I were making decisions, I would sign maybe 3-year contract at most. But yeah, the companies, they give you a deal if you sign for longer. It's all wrapped up in it. Yeah, it's yeah,
But we need people who have the education about what actually works
right.
to be making those decisions. And I get frustrated by all of these bad decisions getting made all the time. Like there's been so many times when I was in the district I was working at, there'd be times that I'm like, why did they just spend $170,000 on this intervention that I know is terrible?
Yeah,
Like, but one person made the decision, convinced someone else, and now it's done. And it's like, well,
yeah,
that was a waste of $170,000.
right.
And
Well, yeah,
two
go
years
ahead.
later, they stopped using it. Or I think a year later, they only used it a year and then it was done. It was such a waste. It was like, come on, you guys can do better. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do sound field amplification in my classroom. That was a few years ago. I'd heard about it from somewhere, and then did all the research and did a whole report. And I heard, I mean, it's I could just talk for hours and hours. I have an interview with Carol Flexer, who's like the goddess of sound field amplification. And I heard that their tech was in classrooms and it wasn't being used. And it was like, and I said, I think this is a waste of money. And again, not another reason but I'm, yeah. Uh, and they said, well, we did train them. We did train teachers. And I said, you train them how to turn it on. You have to train them on the why. The why. Because if you don't train them on the why, teachers are going to think that they can project. It's not about projecting. It has to do with consonants and frequencies and vowels and acoustics and everything. You have to educate them on the why. And so, yeah, there was an opportunity like to buy the machines. And I was like, no, I want to buy them, but it's going to be a waste if people aren't educated. And there was the company, one of the companies was like, they're like chomping at the bit to like come in. And this is back to your point. They're like, want to talk to the tech people. And I'm like, no. I mean, you can talk to them, but as a teacher, that is my worst nightmare for a bunch of tech to get purchased or a program to get purchased, because, and this is how I sound like a tinfoil hat, because some salesman did a good job, and then the hard work of training teachers and supporting teachers isn't done, and then you just might as well set money on fire. It has to be from the ground up. It's never going to happen. So I was joking with my colleagues, I'll be 60, retiring, and go, have you heard about sound field amplification? And then we'll get it all in the district. We'll get it in all dozens of schools we have. And then like 2 years after I retire, someone will go, you know what? Like, it'll change, so it's just bureaucracy. So
yeah, that is what the school I was at had as part of an upgrade in the whole school. They had like torn everything out, put everything back in basically, and they had added the microphones and speakers and everything into every classroom as like part of
oh, really? Yeah.
so it was like built in like in the ceiling basically. It's all built in, and nobody was really using it.
Oh.
Um, no one was even like taught how to turn it on. Like literally, it existed. One of my students was hard of hearing.
Hmm.
She completely deaf in one ear. The other one she could use a hearing aid. It was mostly fine, but then the hearing aid helped like make it so she could hear better.
Right.
But she wasn't great about like there was like issues with her using them, and then it like stopped working, and like so we're like, okay, you need to the teachers, okay, you need to use like the speaker, and oh well, we can't get the like official one from the hard of hearing teacher for another week. Use what's in the classroom. Like, oh, it's such a hassle. Oh, I don't want to have to remember. There's some like, and then like after the day one, teacher's like, I love this. This works so good.
No,
All the kids are paying attention. I get so much more. Like, this is
I
so great.
know.
And it was like sold, done. And that was another example of like it was for one kid, and everyone benefited. And if that kid was absent, it was still being used
Yeah.
because it just became part of what everybody was doing, and it just worked so well.
Oh, it was mind blowing when I finally learned. I mean, I read the research, the it was called the Mars program back in, I think it was like 1970. It was a 13-year long program through the Department of Education. They gave grants to schools, and it was 1980s tech back then, not what it is now. I mean, now it's like way more sophisticated. Then the audiologists did their research in the 90s and confirmed that students or kids listen differently. And that's always like the joke, because adults go, yeah, I know that. I know that they don't pay, but I'm like, no, it's literally science. And it was fascinating because when my son was 5, because there's a difference that audiologists found in like 0 to 5, they're listening to mostly vowels and stuff. After 5, listening, it's not hearing, it's listening, gets more sophisticated. Um, and my son was like, right when he was about 5-ish, like if there was any background noise, he started to have a difficult time. I don't get frustrated with him if he's watching TV and I'm talking the background, because I know there's it's not physiological, it's a developmental learning. They have to learn to identify the signal, the source of location, the source of where the signal is coming from. He hasn't learned that yet. So I'm not going to screech at him because he doesn't turn his head if the TV's on in the background, but it was just fascinating. And so sometimes when my students aren't listening, I go, I have a $1,300 microphone, and I know it is confirmed you can hear me. You are ignoring me, and I don't like having a $1,300 microphone. And like that. But it's changed completely how I've taught. It's just the best kept secret. It really is.
Yeah,
I mean, I talk about it for years.
that's so
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. So yeah, and but that goes back to what you were saying before. Like, it exists. It won't be used if the teachers aren't trained, and that's where like I'm definitely one of those people who is like, all of the world's ills will be cured if we can just have more education. Like, the
Yeah.
more people know, the better people do. Like, we just more education on like everything just improves so much. Because once you like truly know, how can you do anything different than what is for the best?
I
So
know, but I know,
I
and
know.
I totally agree. But sometimes, like, I'm like, I wish, like the Plato allegory of the cave. I'm like, I just want to go back in the cave. Like, it's so like, I'm like, ignorance is bliss, because it's like you see the matrix of like how much better it could be if we
Yeah.
just made very big, yes, big, but also small changes, but because, yeah, like the child with the hearing aid, it was wired into the building, and so that has huge implications for what school the child can go to. Was talking to someone, they said, well, we're a progressive district. I don't think we are, because my child has to go to a different school than mine. I can't bring my child to my own school because I know he's not going to get what he needs for reading instruction. And so that's the kind of the conversation we've had with special needs parents, is like, yeah, you have open enrollment. You say that children can go to any other school, but that's not happening. So I know you say you're progressive, but on my side of the pond, maybe not so much. But uh yeah, but we'll get there. So
Yeah, and it's good that you're pointing those things out, because if you're just like, yeah, we're so great, then they aren't going, oh, there is room for improvement, because we all always have room for improvement.
yeah,
So like, I think pointing it out in a kind way that gets them to actually go, okay, yeah, you're right, I need to do that. Okay.
I think
Hopefully.
it's a mindset thing too, right? Like I don't, I mean, I always joke like, I might have it figured out in year 30 on the last day of my career. Probably not, because I've looked at stuff from a couple years ago. But I think but that's a mindset thing, but If some teacher says to me they have it all figured out, I'm like, that's that's cool because I don't at all. And
Yeah.
I'll know more tomorrow, but when I think back to my first like 5 years, I'm like, ooh, like, we
Yeah.
had a student teacher. She's so hard on herself. And I was like, you got to give yourself grace. I was like, this is your residency. This is your residency. You've been to medical school and you're not going to be at the top of your game for a while. So chill. And as long as you're trying, and improving with feedback, because I've seen teachers that don't improve with feedback, and you just
Right.
have to. It's just not time to find a new career. It's not for everybody. So
Yeah.
yeah. I could talk
Yeah.
to you for a long
I
time.
know. I know. Yeah. Okay. We should wrap this up. Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on. It has been so much fun to chat with you and to hear about all the things that you are doing. Um, is there anything, so this is going to be my final question. Is there anything that parents can do to help improve education for their child, for everyone? Is there anything from, since most of the listeners are parents, like what if anything can they do to make the world better
To wait,
for their child?
for their child specifically?
or or just to improve the state of education? Is there any
Oh
like
dear.
ask that you would have for parents?
Get loud. Go to the SEAC committee. I don't know if it's a federal thing or a state thing in California. SEAC, it's the committee, it's the special ed, it's a state, it's not us. We don't call it SEAC. It's the, by law, each district, each LEA is supposed to have a committee that talks about special education issues. And they have a representative from the district. And um, my son's dad is on the committee, and so he kind of approaches things from the parent side. I kind of approach things from internally. But get loud. It's amazing once parents start talking to each other, you start realizing commonalities, and you also start realizing huge inequities, huge inequities that don't have to happen. There's no reason for those things to happen. And I was looking at the Berkeley Unified School District lawsuit from 2015. I was reading it and I was like, wow, like those parents are so brave because they really opened up the lid on things. I don't want it to be like acrimonious. I don't mean it for that, because I don't necessarily think like this is healthy. But sometimes you can't make changes until you address the problem.
Yeah.
That sounds like duh, of course. Yeah. But like you have to face hard things in order to then make change.
Yeah.
And
I
not
think
be yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
no, well, like to just try to add to what you're saying, like I see that as like really important. Like parents need to be clear, they need to be heard, and so yeah, loud but not aggressive. Like you can be
Right.
kind, just consistent and clear. And like, yeah, no, like my child needs this, my child needs this. I
Yeah.
hear you, but you're not hearing me. My child needs this.
Right.
Until the school finally is like, okay, you're okay.
Well, yeah, that's a huge thing I've run into is like I've had to explain to people, yeah, about like it's not, I think, well, we don't have these resources. And I'm like, at no point in any conversation should that enter into the conversation. I
Right.
said the law is very clear. You
Right.
decide what the child needs, and then you go from there.
Right.
Yeah, but more parents, because parents are, I feel like, the biggest advocates for special ed practitioners. I want my son's SLP to make all the money in the world. I want her to get a lower ratio. So I think a lot, if special ed practitioners would probably be braver. Um, I keep saying brave. I don't know, to cross the aisle and work with parents. and vice versa. It's not the system, and I've been clear. It's not people. Yeah, it can be people, but really usually what I see, it's systems that need to be fixed, because but
Right.
people have good intentions. You
Yeah.
really have to assume. Someone said, "Don't you shouldn't assume good intentions." But I was like, I think I do still. Maybe I'm naive, but
I do too. Because I
yeah,
always think like, why did they get into education if they don't care
right,
about kids? Like, we're here to help kids. And
right,
yes, there's people who should have already retired because they've kind of stopped caring, it feels like, but there's some part of them that cared, and that's why they started. I hope.
right.
And
But
the
like I don't
majority
go.
of people still care a lot.
But then I think about medical. I always like think medical. Like I'm not gonna go to a doctor who like wants to be a good doctor. You know, I'm like, are you killing people on the table? I'm not gonna go to you.
Yes. We want them to care and actually be effective.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, that'd be good. Okay, it's really nice talking to you.
It has been very nice talking
I
to you.
go use my spiral binder. So, good.
All right. Thank you so, so much for being on the podcast. I, yeah, I really appreciate your time and everything. Thank
Yeah,
you.
let's keep in touch too.
Yeah, absolutely.